good to go. I'd love to get started with a panel. Hopefully, we can actually follow up on some of the exciting demos that you saw and entertain you all. But I'd love to get all of these guests on board. We have Sarah from JALI. And what we can do is maybe start with demos, and we can start with Gadney. Maybe like 10 seconds for those that were missed or not quite paying attention to your demo. That's
okay. I sort of want to type that into ChatGPT, for those of you who saw it, to summarize. So Charisma is a platform that sort of powers the heart and soul of digital humans. Type in the script and it triggers the performance. We integrate with JALI, we integrate with Resemble to really create these sorts of digital humans that players can converse with, speech in, speech out. That then changes the gameplay, changes the narrative, and we launched 2 weeks ago a project for Puss in Boots, Dr. Cat, with DreamWorks. Last week was Project Electric Sheep, and next week we're launching a full 5-hour narrative game adaptation of a 1950s sci-fi novel, where you are immersed in 1950s sci-fi.
Awesome. Sarah from JALI?
Okay, yeah, so I'm from JALI Research. We animate from the analysis of input streams. So from audio, from text, from generative AI inputs, and then automatically animate the face. We started as a production tool for creators. Always the pillar is the animator sort of at the center. We've evolved now for it to be more the story as the center. And we want to empower creators to be able to make art with all of these awesome technologies.
We have Cory here. Cory.
We also integrate with Resemble AI as well. Awesome.
Hey everyone, I'm Cory. In a past life, I founded one of the other companies in this building, Benchling, doing bioinformatics. These days, deep in the AI space. Company is Spellbrush. We are one of the sort of state-of-the-art image generation providers. If you've used Midjourney, you've probably interacted with Mura code. And our thesis is around building vertically integrated games. So specifically, we have some of the best image models in the world. We have some of the best anime models in the world, and we're taking it, putting it into mobile games, and trying to build kind of the world's first games with image diffusion deeply integrated in the core. So.
And Lisha.
Hey everyone, this is working, sorry. So I'm founder of Rosebud. We are making the AI Roblox. You probably just saw the demo. So maybe just a little bit of background is that we came from making casual creation tools on mobile. And so that's why we were kind of deeply guided by making intuitive interfaces so that, intuitive enough so that it can go viral on mobile. And more importantly, that kind of carries us to making really intuitive interfaces for making games in personal worlds.
Great. So actually, you know what? We wanted to start with Lisha here. You've all seen the demos with the assets, right? With Playroom, etc. You've seen these assets being just naturally generated here. Obviously, you have, with Cory and Lisha, two different types of assets, right? You have somewhat low-res assets that are being generated, very difficult for a very interesting stream of games. What are some of the challenges that you have there? What have you observed with some of that gameplay versus some of the larger, more AAA games that are built?
Well, I think actually where Cory and Midjourney and Midjourney shine is they're really great. I mean, I know Cory's also using it for his in-game assets, but for general users, instead of saying Midjourney or Midjourney, they're using it for concepting. And then once they actually concepted something that they like, where we fit in is we train a custom model on that and then make in-game ready assets that could actually be used for something like a PC. And this matters because you don't want your players to have to, prompt really, prompt in a very sophisticated manner in order to get what they want, and then you can control the quality and output there. But I think also another way that we're kind of focused is just not just generating the assets, but actually leveraging large language models to also make it easy to create the entire gaming experience.
Gotcha. Touching on those custom models, right, and fine-tuning, I think it's still quite early. We're still learning how to do that. Do you have any best practices? I guess we first start with you. And,
Yeah. So there's varying degrees of how much data you can use in order to bear some structural variance for these fine-tuned models. But I think for what we do, a lot of it is we're actually, there's ways that you can like standardize the data set, and so you don't want to give that completely to the user. I think there's a lot of places where you can go and upload data, try to train a custom model, and ends up giving really bad output. And so we try to just like underneath the hood hide some of the hard work that needs to be done with standardizing, and also just giving users a lot of ready custom training models so they can get what they want faster.
Gotcha. Cory, anything to add to like?
I mean, on the fine tuning, obviously we're like at the foundational model level, so we have a slightly different take, right? The general idea. For us, at least on the research side, is if you make the models bigger and you make them more capable, then you actually don't need special fine-tuned stuff for individual assets or individual specific things. And in many ways, like GPT-4 represents a general purpose model that with like one-shot prompting can do many different tasks without what you used to have to do in the GPT-2 era, where you were fine-tuning it on the individual data. So at least it's not quite currently production ready, but I think like viewing the next like 2, 3, 4 years, maybe general purpose models might be able to also help capture a lot of the complexities that are around the fine-tuning and the individual asset stylization.
I guess you all probably heard some sort of chaining of prompts to get to the right result there. Cory, how much do you see that having a big impact? Is that like?
So we're not super deep in the LLM space, so I can't really talk too deep into that particular one. I would say on the image side, generally a lot of the work goes into trying to give the user, as Lisha said, like try to give the user what they want without your traditional list of sort of what we consider garbage quality tags at the end, right? You're like 4K, hyper-realistic, training on ArtStation. Like people are asking for like subsurface scattering in a picture that like doesn't have subsurface scattering, right? They're like, maybe they're drawing a picture of an anime girl. There's no subsurface scattering in that picture. They're still adding it though because they've been copying these massive sort of prompt recipes in almost like a black book type fashion. And so I would say making the models bigger, not necessarily, perhaps chaining them with like prompt to more specific prompt may help, at least in the image space, but I would say like a big goal of the research on the image side is to make sure that that's not necessary, that you don't have to chain multiple individual language models to get good high quality images.
Gotcha. Anything to add?
Yeah. So I actually think it's kind of interesting that I'm even on this panel because we don't do generative AI. We're sort of like an in-between gauntlet kind of thing that takes in, we're midstream. But a lot of our foundational algorithms are trained on curated data sets. So particularly the language models. So when we're talking about the way people speak one way in one language and one in another language, we don't actually use that big of a data set because you're talking about a very custom and focused situation, and that's what gives it its sort of likeness. That kind of it's based on exactly the kind of thing that you want to do. But then after that, it's part data, part rules, and so someone like Resemble AI, that's the story part, and Resemble would be the voice. Improvement of synthetic voice actually is what makes that part work better with the animation results because there's actually some depth to analyze.
I'd agree to that.
Oh, you got it. I'm forgetting you that one.
I'd agree with that. So we very early on, like JALI, built our own data set because we're using it for a specific storytelling purpose. The more general you get, from our perspective, the more vanilla you get. We did a long piece of research with University of Southern California and the Technology Center there around how to maintain consistency. And actually, the problem was not a character going off out of the story world and saying something outrageous. It was that they were going out the story world and saying something boring, and that tuned out the experience. So we're very much in that framework where GPT is dropped in at certain points, it's deployed. It's like a paintbrush in a palette. You put it in when you want to put it in, when certain things in the storyline dictate improv. If you want to improv around it, it's perfect. But actually, as human beings, we're wired to really good storytelling. So that data set, both ethically and creatively, was what we created very early on to achieve that impact.
Right. we saw some demos, and I think one constant theme was that they all were touching some sort of multimodal approach, right? And this has been a really hot topic with a lot of these language models starting to get into this realm of images as well now. Hasn't quite been released yet, but OpenAI demoed their model will be able to read images and kind of take that as a prompt itself. You have quite a few different ways. There are currently a lot of language modeling prompts, but what do you think about the multimodal AI approach and how that's going to change storytelling on games?
For me, it's less around how it changes. Well, it does change storytelling, but it's actually really simple because it's a trend. And when you look at technology trends, they start on low bandwidth text, and then they build up to a single image, then it builds up to music or audio, then it builds up to moving images in 3D. So I think we're on that same trajectory. And so it is, to me, eminently predictable that that's the trend over the next couple of years as it emerges.
Lisha, you're fairly close to that too. You have language, and you actually started without the language modeling aspect, and then you added LLMs. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that it's multimodal, I mean, just thinking about the use of language models and, again, on the game engine framework side, like, if we want to go for intuitive interfaces and making this tech, way more accessible, making it way easier to be an indie developer, then thinking about using image as the type of way to express the type of game that you want to make or guide it towards a direction without having to, like, describe it in a very difficult way. I think that's where it can immediately be useful. I think the other things like images, it's such a condensed form of another information, and so I think there's a lot of information that we can use to guide what kind of games we want to make.
Interesting. You guys are like kind of getting into the realm of this real time, and Sarah, this is I think where your topic really comes in. But first, before I get to like the challenges of doing all this real time stuff, I want to touch on like the content creation challenges of doing real time. Not the real time factor itself that you're so intertwined in, but from a user perspective, like a lot of these games that you're seeing, a lot of these demos that you're seeing, they're not really in games yet. But they are implying that gamers are going to be interacting with NPCs that are running in real time. What's the difficulty around the designing that? Of course, you've been doing this since GPT-2 was a thing, so you probably understand it really well.
Well, again, I think it's really simple because it's the way that you look at it. So the way that we generally tend to think about these avatars is question and answer. You walk up and you say something and it says something back, and that's the end of the interaction. But that's not engaging, it's not storytelling, and it's not compelling to keep people in the game for a longer period of time. Think about search engines, their goal is to get you in and out as fast as possible, which is why call centers work so well. But from our perspective, we want people to stay in for hours, days, weeks, even years, and constructing that as a model, as a framework first, is what you need to do, and then you can apply it. I'm very strong on the fact that you need to think about the problem first and think about the creative construct you're trying to make, and then build the tech on top of it, not the other way around. So I think the way that we spend a lot of time working with storytellers and writers rooms to set that framework and then build on that.
Right. So the first time I tried like something like JALI, right? One of the challenges I had is I got stick figures. I don't know who else was with me. Like I could type in anything and I get stick figures at the end of it, right? And then I would click the back thing and I would see all these beautiful images. So, I mean, Cory, you were describing this phenomenon of folks having these absurd prompts, right? So isn't that quite a bit of a challenge to get right?
Yeah, I mean, like, I would say the approach that Rosebud does is a pretty good approach where you have models for specific styles, and that is one way to avoid it. I would say on the generalized model side, we're still doing a lot of work, but like human language is very imprecise, right? So typically just writing exactly what you want and you have a picture in your mind's eye, it's still not going to come out quite right. And so going back to the discussion on multimodal, this is actually very important because maybe you don't just want text, but you want an entire sort of mood board of what it is that the image you want. This is still kind of not quite an open research problem, but there's a lot of engineering work that has to go into getting these large generalist models to converge on what you want very quickly. So I would say for production-ready style systems now, like the Rosebud approach, it works pretty well where it's like, okay, this is the pixel art one, and you already kind of know what you're going to get from it. You ask the models, and you're not appending like a paragraph worth of quality tags.
Is that good enough to make it deterministic, or is that what you think the end consumer wants? Is like determinism for the output, like the same prompts are generating the same types of tiles or graphics, or?
I mean, you probably have more thoughts on this, but I think it depends on what you mean by end consumer, right? Because in the easy journey, sort of mid-journey world, the end consumer is looking for inspiration, so they want things to be unexpected, right? They're looking for kind of exploring the boundaries of their imagination. Like I was with a friend a while ago, and we were watching him prompt, and they were typing in completely random stuff, like man wrapped in tinfoil. And like God knows why you would want to see what a man wrapped in tinfoil looks like, but it's like really like the boundaries of like that would be cool. Maybe like a man wrapped in tinfoil wandering around a kitchen, like what would that look like, right? So that's the consumer side of things, I would say, and on the game dev side, you do need assets to be in a very particular style, and that's a very different usage case.
Right. So, Lisha, like, your use case is obviously a bit more deterministic, right? Because you are targeting game developers.
Yeah.
And so, what about determinism for you?
Yeah, I would say they want to be surprised maybe about certain parts of the structure, but not the style of it. So, there's techniques like control net, for instance, that give you like preservation, like say the outlines or how the shape of the body is positioned, and that's how you'll be able to, in a multimodal way, be able to guide some of these models. Yeah.
Right. Any data guide on randomness in AI? Should it exist? Or Sarah, should it exist? Or what is it?
Sarah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree entirely with the point, but it depends on who the end, who's actually using the tool and what their requirements are. You're talking about a large studio that's stewarding a huge IP. That huge IP has a big legacy. They have a lot of responsibility for fidelity to that brand and the relationship that people have with those characters. It's already preset, so deviation from that is like, it's very challenging on many, many levels, and they'll have huge economic impact. Mickey Mouse can't just do something out of character. It definitely can't be racist. It definitely can't be, sexist and all these kinds of things. Like, it ruins a brand instantly, and that's, to a studio, you can't have that happen. But what I think is the iterative part of it, which is consistent for every single tool set here, is about being able to, without incurring additional cost, I think that's one of the best things, that you can do as long as you've got your parameters established. You can start to move forward, and that's the core part of the creative process, is just have a starting point. Someone had said, I think it was from Stability, it was that the blank page problem is solved, kind of thing. I don't know if I 100% agree with that, but the blank page problem is a hard problem, and prompting, as I'm seeing actually in one of the examples, that's another form of revision. And so they are going to get better and better and better at getting to converging, as you said, on the desired result, whatever that outcome, whatever that result is. And so that could be just for randomness, or it could be for getting incrementally closer to the required result.
The blank page problem, that's really interesting, because I think that's been a problem in conversational AI in general and NLP in general. You're presented with a blank, say a year ago, if you told me, a blank text box is a good interface for UI for everything, and I would call you crazy. But it seems like it's normalized now. We saw it in some of the demos too, right? Like folks would come in and say, well, tell me what to type, and just kind of like, well, what can there be? And sometimes it doesn't fit inside the game mechanics. So how do you ensure that some of this generative prompting actually fits inside the mechanics of the game? What are some of the best practices there?
So we're not the end user necessarily. That's the QA. That's QA.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything else to add there? Otherwise, Sarah, I can continue with you, because this is the hot topic here. You have all of this AI stuff, right? And you click the button right now, it takes maybe up to a minute to run, right? Obviously, with your use case, you're trying to get all this stuff to run in ideally milliseconds. What are some of the challenges there?
So if you're part of a large pipeline, you've got your own contribution to the latency at the end of the day, but you're a composite of multiple systems. And so we focus on characters, right? And so there are certain things that people are hyper attuned to, whether they even realize it or not, to deviations from expected behavior. That's the whole, uncanny valley thing. And latency is a huge contributor to that. And so, art direction is one of the things that kind of helps add that a little bit. You make them do things in the instance of avatars. It still kills me when I see demonstrations of avatars and they're still like close up in a box. Everything is here. It's like if they're doing it, they look great if they're not moving. But as soon as they start, you're like, when they're thinking, in addition to idle behaviors, which is like, a very common solution, camera work needs to be put into the app as well so that they can be doing things at angles that can fade in and fade out. They can actually, and then, you're hiding latency essentially. That's direction. You're creating the illusion when some of the technical deficiencies are still maybe not at the same level of other elements in the system.
Gotcha. Well, I know advice to game developers. Cory, any advice when they're dealing with these foundational models? What should they be thinking about, and how should they use them?
So my perspective on this. So for context, we are building games right now, projecting kind of where the technology will be in 6 months, right? So actually, our team is basically split in two. We have a foundational AI model team. We have a game development team. The game development team says it would be cool if X. The AI team says, okay, this might be possible in 3 or 4 months. And so that's how we've been sort of tracking it. I would say, given the state of AI right now, it feels that the number of things that are production ready aren't quite as large as the number of things that people are sort of projecting as production ready. So there are two approaches. One is you could build a game with the stuff that's available right now, but if you choose to do this path, you kind of have to work around the limitations of existing technologies. For particular, we're building mobile 2D anime gacha games precisely because anime is at the production quality of rendering in an unsupervised way. I would not say there's another particular art style that actually can be done like that right now. Meanwhile, if you look at, say, 3D, I don't think 3D is production ready, but if you're planning on doing a game projecting 3D as production ready, I would build everything around it and try and time the sort of development of the game such that when the technology is ready, you'll actually be able to integrate it. That is another strategy.
Gotcha. You alluded to the fast-moving pace, and I think it's a good segue for Lisha and Guy to kind of chime in. What's important right now? Is it to get these prototypes out the door, or how would you advise game developers who are trying to get started with all these tools at their disposal that weren't there about 6 months ago?
I mean, it's partially our job is to make it easy and more accessible. So yeah, you can kind of what Cory was saying about production ready. I think there's a huge spectrum of from AAA all the way down to indie dev who's really just playing and making stuff maybe for an audience of one, but hopefully more. And so I think with those, it's getting it into the workflow and then not just for assets, but also just how they're actually creating the code base for the game. That's what's going to make them much more experimental and ready to benefit from the advancements of these large models very soon.
Anything to add, Jack?
Yeah, I think there's an enormous amount of optimization that can happen in the game development process. It's a long, laborious process. There is a real art to good game design. So you've got to look at the totality of a game production process and work out where you deploy AI specifically. And that can have a really good impact. You can speed up. That speed to deploy is exactly where this is really good. But I wouldn't layer it over the whole thing. Certainly not with Cory. It's not there yet. And Electric Chip is dream world specifically because it's not there yet. But I would also echo what Sarah's saying is to aim for perfect, to aim for pixel perfect humans is not necessarily the right goal to aim for. You want to aim for an impact, an effect. and that is often not a total representation of the human face. I believe Charlie Brown cartoons more than I believe some animations of meta-humans.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that.
Absolutely. I want to open it up to questions for the audience. I know we're getting to finishing moments here, but anyone, go ahead.
Hi. My question is kind of difficult to phrase, so I'm sorry in advance. It's regarding the generative AI. So we have a cutoff date for ChatGPT. So we know it's based on the human-generated content. Like 10 years in the future, AIs will be trained on the work of other AIs. And how do you guys think that would come out? Because we need to, we can try to curate it, but we will not be able, the next year we will not be able to discern what's human and what's not. And where will that lead us?
I can tell you of a use case we're using right now for that, which is think about the audience. So we're launching a game. We get the marketing copy for that game to be written such that, not so that you can read it, but so that YouTube algorithms can read it. So I'm prompting the AI to be read by other AI. I'm bypassing that. And by the way, that optimizes straight for AI, because in some essence it's AI talking to AI, and you're starting to see a lot higher rankings if you're optimizing for it. So I think it goes back again to what the intent is for what you're trying to do.
Yes, you will get better. But since AI is not ideal for if we take Midjourney versus 2 versus 3 and versus 4, and we train some other algorithm on the versus 2 and versus 3 and forget about versus 4, version 4, which is already photorealistic and we can tell. And then the next generation of AI trained on these and real, and we can understand that we are generating interesting images, but the quality may go down because user-generated images, like hand-drawn or something like that, is not in such volume as the AI-generated content.
I mean, so my perspective on this, if you look at the language model world, is that we were already inundated with low quality tokens by SEO spam anyways. And so human curated AI output in many ways is higher quality than what already exists in the scraped data sets. So yes, it's true, there will be a lot of AI stuff, but those AI things actually have some human intent behind it because someone picked and chose to put it there. And in that way, it's actually higher quality data than a lot of the generic procedural spam that exists on here. So I think you will see these things get integrated. We already have a lot of processes for classifying what constitutes good data and what constitutes bad data when you dump it into the pot for training systems. And I think the new AI stuff actually will improve the quality actually relative to the stuff that we have.
Thank you.
Any yes?
I think my is long enough. Again, great discussion. Thank you so much. Who is a creator? Who is an owner? And who owns the work that has been created? Because we're pretty much deconstructing the creation process to a level that we can granularly identify what led to what, and that's very provable, programmable. So given that we're in a programmable environment almost for everything, we're composing and programming at every layer, the protocols to the code to everything else, who is a game developer? Is it unlocking the 8 billion minds? They all have some element of creativity, because the tools are getting democratized and they have the same access. Or the niche aspect of hey, I am the gamer, this is it, all me. Doesn't matter, it means there's going to be an exponential output of content that can be very high quality. And initially may be assisted by what we're seeing with generative AI, but it's not just generative AI, there's many other modalities of machine learning, neural networks, a combination of models that are going to become low code, no code, that's going to be available to a direct consumer. So I think the creator economy is pretty a right apt way to understand, and also who is an artist. I think it's really fundamentally questioning those concepts, and what would I so just to follow on this question, we are training. I think the human input that is needed is pretty much coming to an end. Then the machine input is going to the machine input. That probably, I don't even think we have a role there. So how do you even approach that as we're going to think about your consumer base? Or how do you want to scale, like even the next 2 years?
So the answer to your question is you've got to look at the answer through multiple filters, and some of them are legal, some of them are ethical, some of them are creative. Right now, copyright does not exist legally through an
It
AI.
does. Actually, a few copies have already been issued and granted in the US.
It's moving very quickly.
It's
Yeah, it's
moving
moving
very
very
quickly. Right now, as I understand it, in legal terms, this was a discussion I had with a lawyer yesterday around it, it's not recognised as formal copyright as art. But that's right now, and that will change, exactly as we're saying, so I'm not saying it's a set. Then you start to look at cases like the monkey who took a photograph, because the photographer set up
the
a
person
monkey
took
took a
the
photograph, and it's
versus the human.
there's a framework that needs to exist for this, and we haven't created it yet. It's not. So this is new. This is new space. I don't know the answer because I think that having looked at it, top to bottom, there needs to be a lot more thought about it, and the law is slow. And by simply saying who is the creator, the implications of answering that question are so broad and so deep that it merits good thought. So the answer today is not something. It's not going to be the same answer, that is projected by institutions around the world in the coming.
The key distinction I'm making is a creator versus owner. Copyrights come from ownership. Anyone can own. Creator is the one that's originating. But how do you even know the origination? Because we're able to trace and track in many different ways. The origin, the source of it. Because many things are derivatives of the original, by and large. And that becomes a copyright as separate,
Again, it's complicated because sometimes the copyright might rest with the creator, even though you own the artwork. So you own the artwork, but actually you are not allowed to copy that artwork. That's the state of life. It's complicated.
Any other thoughts from the panelists?
It will vary as well for who the stakeholder is too, right? Like when you're talking about, when I talk to studios, it's a no-go for a minute because anything that sort of will get in the way of the release of product, including any like a whiff of a legal implication, and it's just I have teams that really want to use this. They'll iterate it in their R&D layer of the studio, but for release-ready product, it's not there yet because what you're talking about, the framework for assigning and find what's the endpoint in the chain, so that you can have that, like you said, the definable origin point that you can say, okay, here's where the ownership or the creation point is. It will propagate in the sort of indie layer faster because the stake is as high economically.
Can I just add, by the way, there is another piece to this, which is copyright and data sets, and like you ask OpenAI, what's your data set? It's a really interesting question. And there have been legal cases going back to 2016, Google versus the Authors Guild of America, which was claiming copyright over the data set. It's complicated. But interestingly, that case very few people know about because it was not visible. Then you start to get to the, you can see it and you get.
Oh, absolutely. Because there were some which have already been issued without having to question that. So the law right now rests on both sides. It's proven on both sides.
Yes.
It's an interesting space evolving, but copyrights have been issued completely generated by generative AI, both novels, to pictures, to images, like all artworks. But at the same time, the same things were questioned in other contexts, based on the state and jurisdiction.
I want to move on to a few other questions. Gentleman in the back.
Okay.
That's you, yes.
Oh, yeah. Hello. So, I speak from a bit of experience. I used to work at Horizon. We found that most creators generally, all creator economies kind of follow this Pareto principle, where you have the top 5% of creators making the content that everybody wants to consume. Same in mod communities too, right? So how do you does that worry you? Because that is okay, the tools you're building kind of democratize active creation, a lot of people want to create. But honestly, most people create absolute crap. So how do you increase, you're lowering the floor, which is great, but how do you also increase the ceiling? Because then when you want to increase the ceiling, you get to I need a really complex tool like Maya or whatever to actually do the shit. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Are you worried about that?
I guess not, because I mean, you don't increase the ceiling by making, like, I don't think you need better tools in order to increase the ceiling. I mean, if you look at TikTok, for instance, right? Like, it's not like it's a AAA kind of production, but it still follows through to distribution. It's just like, you just want to increase the volume so that there's more creators. And some of them are not going to be very good, and that's fine. You know, and just like, as long as the person who is really good, who can have access to doing game development, because maybe they're not even naturally a developer, like that's exciting to me, because you just increase the, you know, people who are good at storytelling and make them available to make games.
Other, yes.
Yeah, okay, so I have a question, like, do you have some recommendations for artists, like 2D artists, when we want to replace them with, I mean, don't want to replace them obviously, because that's what I've been trying to tell them for the last couple of days. No, you have to improvise, overcome, adapt, and that's my, let's say, take on this. Do you have like similar approach, or what's your take on this?
I kind of feel very aligned with your point on that one. It's not certain processes are going to be replaced. Jobs, ways of doing jobs will change. AI will be part of pipelines, whether they're one-man shop or giant conglomerates. And then again the quality and the what. Like the technology itself doesn't have a creative intent. It's a tool. It's a medium, and so it's when a painter paints, it's not painting a picture as in already done. It starts with a concept or an idea, and then it actually interacts with the paint itself to get iteratively closer to the result. So it's the use of it that will change the way it develops, the way the tool chain and the tools that sort of harness it is sort of like Infinity Gauntlet kind of thing. There's a lot of capacity here, but it needs to be channeled. And the channeling isn't through one thing, it's through the repetitive use over and over and over of it.
Something also very specific on our platform is if you're an artist who has a body of work, you can train a custom model on your stuff and then also make that accessible to other people. So you're creating kind of a new marketplace and a way to amplify your own IP and therefore get your own kind of like name out there. So yeah, we're very happy to work with creators in that capacity.
Great. Perhaps one more question. Yes, sorry, I missed you earlier.
So just more of like a art of the possible kind of question. So one of my favorite games is like open world games, which are very like Witcher 3 or Middle-earth. Now the main critical piece is the fact that the NPCs, right? And environmental is models short. Like there's resources there's models. I'm really waiting for everybody to get meetings. That itself is helpful. But is it possible for such AI to actually write the NPCs, which typically take a lot of dev time to actually write the day-night routine and what they do, like all that stuff? Is it possible where we can supply it with book material or source material and the AI does the NPC drawing, fills up your world, and you just write the story?
So if I can point you to the white paper we wrote with the University of Southern California, it's called a Universal Character Model. It answers exactly that question. How do you have an NPC, which is part of a narrative, because that's the game, actually, the game is start to finish, that can last for years. So I'll leave it there as a promotion. Universal Character Model.
Cory, Lisha, any thoughts on NPCs and AI?
I think what you're imagining is going to happen. And it's a matter of whether it's 6 months or 2 years.
It's
not any longer than that.
Yeah, it is for sure, right? Like I think the parts that I realized is that now, as everyone's like The Last of Us, right? Like there's a game that became a TV show, and I think there's a big challenge of like other way around with books becoming games, right? Like I would really love to see Game of Thrones become in real life. Now, it would be amazing based on like other medieval stories that it's able to write an NPC, right? But of course, it now goes back to the copyright question, and there's like, is it replicative, is it transformative copyright, and all that stuff. But whenever there's the augmentation of the game, but if I write the story component of AI, I can see where it's an issue. But that's where the thing is like, if I own the transformative work, is it replicative? Like at what point is like the delineation? Do you think that do you think we'll arrive to some kind of consensus on that within the next few years, or do you think it's going to be an ongoing conversation for years to come?
The legal side?
Yes, I would say, I guess legal side would make sense, right? Can I sell a game which I've used AI and the performance of other people to build this game, like the NPCs, for example? Or if I've written the story itself with the help of an AI, right? Like, what is the critical components of the game that says that this is something that I built versus, okay, the world I've built out, like let's say you sell worlds, right? Like you build deep world and I write stories in them. Can I sell that game?
I think that's back to the
Exactly.
question
So
there.
it's like, do you think that is going on for years? Okay. That was basically it.
Very nice, yes. Panelists. So panelists will stick around for a bit. I do want to give you guys time to ask questions, talk amongst yourselves, and network. So we do have a space for, how long is the space for? An hour. I've been told we're going to take that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the panel discussions and the demos. Thank you all for coming.